I will now request His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami Maharaj to address us. Maharaj, it is indeed an honor for us to be graced by your presence today. We are eagerly waiting to hear from you. Please enlighten us with your wisdom. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you very much. I will begin with a short kirtan. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी
Jai Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari
जय गोपी जन वल्लभ
Vallabha
गिरिवरधारी
Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja
यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन
Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja
यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन
Yamunatira Vanachari
यमुनातीरावनचारि
Yamunatira Vanachari
यमुनातीरावनचारि
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
जय श्री
Shri
कृष्ण
Krishna
चैतन्य
Chaitanya
प्रभु
Prabhu
नित्यानंद
Nityananda
श्री
Sri Advaita
अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
हरे
Hare
कृष्णा
Krishna
हरे
Hare
कृष्णा
Krishna
कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम हरे राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 Hare Hare.
Pada
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol.
Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Parivrajakacharya Ashtotar Sat. His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravindra Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrind Ki Jai.
Jai,
Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai.
Jai,
Gaur Premanande.
Hari
All
Hari
glories
Bol.
to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga.
Gaur Hari Bol.
Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. A very warm welcome to all of you who have gathered for this evening's audio talk. I am very happy and honored to be part of this program, and this is the beginning of a very interesting series of lectures. The series is titled Sravanam, as we have just heard, and various spiritual topics will be discussed in the course of this series. So I am happy that I have the opportunity to speak today for all of you. Some of you will be regular practicing devotees of ISKCON, and some of you are perhaps a little new to what the ISKCON teachings are, and some of you may be completely new. Regardless, I hope that the content of today's talk will be relevant for everyone who has gathered today. The word Sravanam means hearing. It is not ordinary hearing, because hearing is a very serious process. Hearing is not simply just letting things come in through one ear and going out through the other. So there is a process of submission, a process of sincerity and raptness that is associated with the word hearing, in order to distinguish it from just ordinary mundane hearing in day-to-day discourse. Our founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada called it submissive oral reception. A-U-R-A-L, refers to the ears. So submissive oral reception refers to listening with submissiveness and eagerness and with attention to spiritual subjects. Now, Shravanam, or hearing in this manner, is very important in life. From childhood, we've probably heard the proverbial saying that we should speak less than what we hear because we have one mouth only, whereas we have 2 ears, which means we are intended to hear more than we speak. We are all familiar with the importance of hearing in our day-to-day life. Little children, for example, they learn languages simply by hearing. That is how all of us learn to speak. We learn to speak a language quite a bit before we learn to write and read the alphabets of any given language. So the power of hearing is very significant. Not just for children learning languages, but all through for the process of education, the process of hearing is very important. Whether in school, in university, or anywhere else, it is so important to hear. And therefore, rightly has it been said that hearing is the soul of knowledge. When we speak of the soul of knowledge, we mean that it is the heart. It is the key to acquiring knowledge. Actually, our ears are our most primary sense organ. We acquire knowledge of the world through our senses: the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ears, and our skin. And then we process that data or that information that we receive in our mind, analyze it with our intelligence, and then we act in a certain way. So the organs by which we gather information are called the jnanendriyas. Indriya means senses and jnan means knowledge. So these are the knowledge acquiring senses. And then once we have assimilated that information, we have analyzed it to some degree, we act accordingly through our working senses. So all our senses are important in the process of gathering information about the world we live in. However, the sense of hearing or the oral reception is very important, perhaps the most important amongst all the sense organs. Now, we may think perhaps the eyes are the most important, even though the eyes are certainly very important, and if we lose our eyesight, we know what a great loss it will be. So undoubtedly, the sense of sight is very, very important. And yet, it is the sense of hearing that is considered to be even more important than the sense of seeing through the eyes. Some of you may have heard of a person called Helen Keller. She lived long ago, many years ago, in America. She was an author, a political activist as well. She was an intellectual, a well-known intellectual, and she interacted with people in all areas of society. And she said one time that deafness is a greater affliction than blindness. Deafness is worse misfortune. So therefore, for a person who was both blind and deaf, she realized that actually losing the sense of hearing was a greater problem than losing the sense of seeing with the eyes. So why is it that the sense of seeing is not as important as hearing? Although, as I've mentioned, both are indeed very important. We can see that the information that we gather by the ears can be more authoritative. We have many, many great saints who have been blind. Surdas, Bilvamangal Thakur, etc. So therefore, without seeing, we can function. We can hear everything only if you have the power to hear. If we have not heard, then we will not know how to pronounce words. Therefore, the sense of hearing is important for the sake of speaking as well. So this is as far as our daily life is concerned. Let us consider from a philosophical point of view why sound is important. Actually, the Vedic literature, the Vedanta Sutra, the Upanishads, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad-Gita, they all declare that sound is actually the origin of everything. It is the beginning of creation of this whole world. So it is from sound that everything originates. Of course, ultimately sound is created by the Supreme Lord, by God Himself. But when it comes to the different elements of nature, of all the subtle elements, then sound is the origin of them all. There are some gross elements, which are earth, water, fire, air, and ether, according to Bhagavad-Gita. And there are the corresponding subtle elements, the subtle elements that correspond to these gross elements. So, ether corresponds to sound. So, sound is actually the subtle form of ether. And it is from sound then ether comes. From ether comes touch. And in this way, the whole subtle and gross element hierarchy is created. So the Vedanta Sutra also says that because sound is the origin of all objects of material possession, and it is the cause of the creation, it is the cause of our entanglement in this world, in the cycle of birth and death. Therefore, it is sound that is also the cause of our liberation. Srila Prabhupada, in one of his purports, cites the last verse of the Vedanta Sutra, Anavrittihi Shabdat. Actually, the author Vyasadeva repeats this phrase, Anavrittihi Shabdat, Anavrittihi Shabdat, to indicate that it is the concluding verse of the Vedanta Sutra. And what is the meaning of this verse? Anavrittihi means that there is no longer return. Return where? To this material world. From the Bhagavad-Gita and the other Vedic literature, we can understand that we are trapped in the cycle of birth and death. We are eternally the spirit soul, the Atma. That is our true identity. But the Atma has been trapped in this material body. And because we are unaware of our true nature, of our spiritual existence, so we act in ignorance and create bondage for ourselves. This is called the bondage of karma. We perform some activity and then we get a certain reaction. And in order to face the continued reactions in future, we have to keep taking birth again and again. So this causes the repetition of birth and death. We have to keep on taking body after body. But in this verse, the Vedanta Sutra says that one can avoid returning to this material world, returning to the cycle of birth and death, returning to another material body. By what process? By Shabdat, by sound. What kind of sound? It is not ordinary sound. It is a certain kind of sound that has the potential that has the potency to enable us to not return to this world. So just like sometimes there may be a rocket that now people fire into space, and it has to go beyond a certain velocity for it to escape from the gravitational pull of the earth, and then it leaves the circle of influence of the earth and goes far away into space. So otherwise, it remains within the control of the earth planet. So similarly, when there is ordinary sound, it keeps us trapped in the cycle of birth and death. All day we are dealing with sounds. We're also dealing with sights, tastes, forms, touch, and so on. But as far as sound is concerned, we are dealing with that every day. But such sound does not have the potency or the capacity to liberate us from the cycle of birth and death and to situate us in our constitutional spiritual position. And that is possible only by spiritual sound. So when it says here, anavrittihi shabdat, that one will cease returning to this material cycle of birth and death by sound, the sound that is spoken of here is a spiritual sound as revealed in the Vedic scriptures. So the word is Shabda. In ordinary language, in the Indian languages, Shabda means a word. But in Sanskrit, when it is used in the spiritual context, we understand that Shabda means the word of the scripture, of the Vedas. And it is such sound vibration which is called transcendental because it transcends or goes beyond the material realm, that we can actually get the power to go beyond the material world with the help of this sound.
So, Shabda, as we know, is to be heard. Sound has to be heard. So, this is the philosophical understanding of why hearing is so important for us. And especially understanding that sound is the origin of everything is a very important principle to know. So, I mentioned briefly that we all have so many things to hear about every day. When you open the television set or your telephone and get news and you meet people, we discuss so many topics. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the great sage Shukadev Goswami says, Shotavyadi Nirajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrashaha Apashyatam Atmatattvam Griheshu Grihamedhinam. He says to King Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, the grandson of Arjuna, to whom the famous Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken. He says that, my dear king, human beings in general have hundreds of topics to hear about and discuss. And therefore, they relish these topics and become completely absorbed in them. But actually, these materialistic topics are relished only by those who have no understanding or no taste for spiritual matters. Atma Tattva. Atma means spiritual, and Tattva means the principle or the truth or the reality. So those who have no interest in spiritual matters, they relish the Shabda or the words or sentences that pertain to materialistic affairs. So therefore we see there is so much to be heard and spoken of in the fields of politics, sports, entertainment, business, gossip of various sorts, and so on. But that will not help us in our spiritual journey. The basic teaching of the Bhagavad-Gita and of all the Vedic scriptures is that we are not meant for a worldly life. We are meant for spiritual self-realization. We are meant to attain spiritual perfection because that is what we are essentially. We are spiritual beings. And if we do not pay any heed to our ultimate goal of self-realization, then it is a life lived in vain according to the Vedic scriptures. So therefore, whatever we see, whatever we engage our senses in, whether it is a sense of touch, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense of sight, etc., everything must be geared or oriented towards becoming self-realized. Of course, we have to survive. We have to earn our bread and butter. We have to carry on with our daily activities. We have so many responsibilities in our worldly life. So that is not a problem. We may continue to do all of these, but we also need to simultaneously absorb our consciousness in hearing from the Vedic scriptures like the Bhagavad-Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and so on. It is by such submissive hearing that we actually begin to understand what spiritual life is. And in this way, gradually, step by step, we start making advancement in our spiritual life. So this was generally the custom in the earlier days in India. And it is there to some degree even now, but it has been rapidly lost because the society has become extremely materialistic now. So, as I mentioned earlier, we are spiritual beings, we are the spirit soul, but we have forgotten that. We are like a person in a dream who imagines himself to be a king or whatever else. He forgets who he is. When we are asleep, we are completely forgetful of our real identity and our circumstances. So, in the same way, we can say that the soul is asleep right now, in the sense that it is covered over by some form of darkness, some form of illusion and ignorance, because of which the soul is not able to remember its own spiritual nature. And the soul wrongly identifies itself with this body and with everything that is connected to and around the body. Now, when a person is sleeping, what is the best way to wake up that person? The best way is to create a loud sound. So, because of that sound, the person wakes up. One moves in from the state of deep sleep, even into the state of wakefulness. So, similarly, the Vedic scriptures tell us that the soul needs to be awakened from its illusioned condition to the awakened condition. So the Garud Puran, which is one of the important Puranas, it compares all of us who are forgetful of our spiritual nature and we're living here in this material world to a man who has suffered a snake bite and who has become unconscious. So there are different ways. Now, of course, we have uh, modern medicines, and if you can inject an antidote to the snake bite, the person can get revived from the ill effects of the snake bite. But in the olden days, there was no such thing as injections and so on. But there were other herbal remedies, and there was another very interesting remedy, which is the chanting of mantras. So there is a verse which says, Sarpaha kruraha khalaha kruraha. Sarpat krurataha khalaha. Mantraushadhi vashaha sarpaha khalaha kena nivaryate. It says that a snake is cruel or envious by nature. Sarpaha. And khalaha means an envious person. An envious person is also cruel and envious by nature. But Sarpat krurataha khalaha. But more dangerous than a snake is an envious person. Why so? Because the snake can be pacified by chanting of mantras and by giving it certain herbs. So mantra and aushadhi, vashaha sarpaha, one can control the snake by this process. But khalaha kena nivaryate, but there is no remedy for a person who is extremely envious of other people. So the point in our discussion here is not so much the envy, but the point that a snake can be controlled by mantra and by medicines, by certain types of herbs. So similarly, when a person is bitten by a snake, one of the ways to revive him is to chant certain types of mantras. Actually, many years ago, I was uh, visiting a certain village in Uttar Pradesh, and I was living in a small temple of Hanuman in that village. So there were some devotees living there, and they had invited me, and they arranged some accommodation for me in the village Hanuman temple. So there was a room there, and so I was living there for a couple of days. On the second night of my stay there was a loud uh, commotion going on. And when I came out in the middle of the night, I saw that a lady was being brought in on a stretcher, and she was screaming in pain. When I asked the people what happened, they said she was bitten by a snake in the fields in the evening. And somehow they tried everything, and now they brought her to the temple of of Hanuman. And then they brought a certain local person, a folk healer, and in front of my very eyes, I saw him chanting variety of mantras, and he healed that lady in a very short period of time, and she just got up and walked away. So I had heard this in Srila Prabhupada's lectures and books, but this was the first time I saw it with my own eyes. So therefore, the idea that chanting of certain mantras can cure one of snake bite is indeed something that I practically saw, as they say, with my own eyes. So in the same way, the Garud Puran says that we in the material world, having forgotten our real nature, are asleep from a spiritual point of view. We are bitten by the snake of Maya, the snake of illusion. And so we need to be treated by certain mantras. So those mantras are essentially a transcendental sound vibration, which means spiritual sounds. These are sounds that come from the Vedic scriptures. Mantras cannot be concocted by us. They have to come from an authentic source, which means the Vedic scriptures. So therefore, the process of chanting spiritual sound vibration enables us to be awakened to our original spiritual position. So, when we hear of spiritual subjects, then automatically the desire and the inclination to hear material subjects diminishes, and we start getting a taste. We start relishing spiritual subjects. There is a verse also in the Srimad Bhagavatam which says Nivritta Tarshay Rupagiyamanad Bhavaushada Shrotra Manobhiraman Ka Uttama Shloka Gunanuvadat Uman Virajyeta Vina Pashupna. So King Parikshit, whom I briefly mentioned earlier, he requests Shukadev Goswami, the speaker of the Srimad Bhagavatam, to speak some more about the glories of Lord Krishna, who is the primary subject of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he says that the topics concerning Lord Krishna are so beautiful, so captivating, and so purifying, so pleasurable to the ear and to the heart, that who would not submit to the process of hearing such descriptions of Lord Krishna, descriptions of his qualities, descriptions of his names, descriptions of his pastimes, his beautiful form, and so on. Who would not do this except for someone who is very, very cruel? So, Parikshit Maharaj is surprised that there are people indeed who may not be attracted to the narration, to the sound vibrations concerning Lord Krishna. So that is something very astonishing for him. And for one who's a pure devotee of Krishna, who relishes topics about Krishna and the names of Krishna, this is indeed something very astonishing. And it is not very hard to understand why. If somebody has a taste for something and another person doesn't have a taste for the same thing, then this person can't understand why it is so. Why is it that this other person does not understand that this is so good? So those who are very fond of alcohol, for example, they cannot understand why others are not interested in alcohol because they seem to relish that. So that is a kind of a perverted expression. But on the spiritual platform, the great saintly people have been relishing the transcendental sound through their ears, the holy names of Lord Krishna, the magical and poetic and captivating descriptions of Lord Krishna's pastimes. So they become uh, very, very addicted to that. So the Vedic culture from ancient times focuses a lot on the process of hearing. We must hear from authorized sources. We cannot hear from people who are not qualified in the spiritual science. So when we come to the association of devotees, then automatically all our um, ill motivations disappear. There is a very famous true story of this um, dacoit who lived somewhere in North India, and he was a very feared dacoit. One day he decided that he would steal from some gathering that he saw. It was actually a gathering of devotees of Lord Krishna, and they had gathered there, and there was a speaker who was speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam. So as he joined the group, he was trying to look around in the audience and identify all those who appeared to be wealthy. So he was trying to target and zero in on his potential victims. Who are the people whom he could steal from? So his whole attention was only focused on that. But in the meanwhile, certain things the speaker was saying also drifted into his ears. And then something caught his attention. The speaker was describing the beauty of Lord Krishna in Vrindavan. And he described the various beautiful features of his body, like his eyes, his hair, his ears, his form, his hands, his feet, and so on, his smile, etc. And then he started describing his clothing. And then he started describing the various ornaments he was wearing, including his bracelets and bangles and the ankle bells and the earrings and so on. And as he was describing these ornaments, the thief's ears perked up, and he thought, oh, so this child has so many valuable ornaments, and if I just steal from this one child, then I'll be able to retire early. I'll get so much money that I don't need to work at all anymore. I can just relax for the rest of my life. So he, of course, did not know who Krishna was. He had no clue what is Vrindavan, who is Krishna. So anyway, he decided now it is very important for me to hear with rapt attention. Because when we are interested in something, then we hear any topic connected to that which promises to fulfill our desires with great attention. Let's say we are interested in making money on the stock market, and we hear somebody talking something about that, giving some very useful tips on how to make a lot of money on the stock market. Naturally, if we are interested in that, our attention will get sparked and we will start hearing very carefully so that we don't miss anything. So, because this dacoit was driven by the desire to uh, get those jewels so that he could become a very wealthy person in a short time, he heard that whole lecture very, very carefully. And he understood it. Unless I hear the description of Krishna very carefully and his address and everything, I will not be able to locate him when I go to Vrindavan. So he heard with rapt attention. And then after the satsang was over, then he left that place and he started asking for directions to Vrindavan. And he went to Vrindavan. And when he went to Vrindavan, all the way in the course of the walk, it was a long, long walk, taking many days. And he was constantly repeating to himself everything that he heard that sadhu speak in that lecture, because he did not want to forget even a single word, lest he not be able to identify Krishna in Vrindavan. So anyway, so he was completely absorbed in that. So because of having heard that, and because he was repeating it to himself so he wouldn't forget, he ultimately uh, began to memorize it. And everything that the sadhu said was now firmly embedded in his mind. And when he reached Vrindavan, he was looking around. And then he asked, "Do you know where is Krishna?" And people said, "Yes, yes, go down there. He's over there." So he finally found Krishna, who was there. And Krishna was, of course, a child. And then he went up to Krishna and said, he tried to make friends with him. And he tried to, um, uh, speak sweetly so that the boy would hand over his valuables to him. And but the boy was afraid. He said, "Give me your valuables, give me your jewels." And the baby Krishna, the child, the young boy, he said, "No, no, no, I can't give it to you. My mother will scold me for this." So he was trying to gently persuade Krishna to give him the jewels, but every time Krishna was refusing and he was smiling. And so charming was Krishna's behavior and his speech and his appearance that this um, dacoit was completely enamored and captivated, and he lost all desire to steal anything from Krishna. He just wanted to be with Krishna. And eventually he settled down in Vrindavan, became a great devotee. This event happened far after Krishna had actually departed from Vrindavan physically. But in a spiritual sense, Krishna is always present in Vrindavan. So then this dacoit, he remained in Vrindavan and he was completely transformed from a dacoit, and eventually he became a great saint. And the reason for that was that he had heard with rapt attention. Now there is a logic in Sanskrit called Kaimutya Nyaya. The logic of if for something it is this much, then for that it is how much. So when this person, this dacoit, was motivated by some materialistic reason, and he heard Srimad Bhagavatam carefully with attentive listening, submissive oral reception, just see the benefit he got. So if someone who was motivated by materialistic desires could attain this after hearing the Bhagavatam with rapt attention, what then to speak of those devotees who hear with a pure heart, who are sincerely seeking to become spiritually self-realized and to become pure devotees of Krishna? What then to speak of them? So one can hear for various reasons. The hearing of the dacoit was in the mode of passion, the rajogun, as per the Bhagavad-Gita. In the mode of ignorance, tamogun, one hears out of fear. In the mode of rajas, one hears out of a desire for some material reward. In the mode of goodness, one hears out of duty or out of some basic faith. But when one becomes a devotee of Krishna, by hearing, then gradually, whether one has come to the process of hearing about Krishna by through the mode of ignorance or passion or goodness, one starts getting increasingly attracted to topics of Krishna and his names. And then gradually, the attraction becomes so strong that the everything else becomes inconsequential. So In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the incarnation of Lord Krishna, Kapiladev speaks this beautiful verse in which he says, Mad guna shruti matrena, mai sarva guhashaye, manogatiravicchinna yatha gangam basom budhau. He says that my pure devotees, when they hear my qualities, they hear my pastimes, they hear my names, etc., simply by hearing about me, who am living in their hearts, their minds become completely absorbed in me and their thoughts run after me spontaneously and do not leave me. Just as the Ganga, as she flows down the hills and goes into the plains, reaches into the sea somehow or the other, bypassing all the obstacles. So this kind of spontaneous attraction to Krishna, which culminates in pure love for him, which is the ultimate goal of our life, which is the highest spiritual achievement and position, that is achieved by the process of hearing about Krishna in the association of faithful, sincere devotees. That is the real benefit of hearing spiritual topics. On the other hand, simply hearing materialistic topics in the newspapers and the television and so on will not give us any spiritual value unless what we are reading is connected to Lord Krishna. So that is why the process of hearing is our most faithful friend in the process of attaining real happiness. Because real happiness is only spiritual. And once we develop a taste for hearing about Krishna, for chanting his names, and so on, then we are well on the way to success, to life. So that is why the process of Sravanam is so important, because it can help us, if properly done and if properly directed towards the appropriate subject matters in connection with Lord Krishna, it can make us attain the ultimate perfection of life. Thank you very much. So I'll stop here and I'll leave the session open for any questions.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for such an enlightening lecture. Now, I would request the audience, if you have any questions, please press the button on the bottom right of your screens and raise your hand, and then I will enable your speaking. So, in the meanwhile, Maharaj, if I may ask a question, is that you spoke about the importance of hearing, and as you said, that everything starts with hearing. So, when we see that we go to the temple, we see the deities. Uh, when we do seva, we touch. So, how important is hearing over and above the other devotional activities?
Thank you for the question. Actually, it is the most important activity because uh, even for making our seeing with our eyes meaningful, we have to hear first. Since you mentioned uh, going to the temple and seeing the deity of the Lord, now a deity of the Lord is not different from Krishna. It is Krishna who has manifested himself in material elements to make himself available to his sincere devotees. So now, if somebody has no understanding or no knowledge of this, that person will think of the deity of Krishna merely as being a stone statue. So that will not give any spiritual benefit. Whereas for somebody who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he has appeared in the form of the deity to show his mercy on the devotees, then that person's vision of the deities is perfect. So, how has that person got such a vision? It is by hearing. So, therefore, the Srimad Bhagavatam says, Shrutekshita, that one must learn to see through the years when it comes to spiritual subjects. So when one gathers knowledge through the years, then automatically one's vision changes. One can give a simple example. Let us say one goes to a doctor and the doctor asks us to get some tests done, like an x ray and a blood report and so on. Now, when we look at the x ray, as lay persons, we do not understand what that x ray means. But when the doctor looks at the x ray film, he immediately understands what's wrong with us. So, both of us are looking at the same x ray film. Both of us have good eyes to see. We are seeing exactly the same thing. And yet, the doctor is able to see something that we are not able to see. And what is the reason for that? The reason is that the doctor has knowledge. The knowledge has been gained by hearing and by reading, also, of course, but primarily by hearing, attending the classes, discussions, etc. So, similarly, when we gather spiritual knowledge through our ears, then we also develop the correct spiritual vision. So, that is why the hearing is more important, even in relation to the other senses.
Thank you for that, Maharaj. Very enlightening. If there are any other questions, please raise your hand by clicking the button on the bottom right of your screen. There's a hand icon, and then we can take up the questions.
We have few hands that are raised.
Yes, please go ahead with your question. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Prabhu, you're muted.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you very much for the wonderful class on this process of hearing, which is the most primary, as you explained. Uh, these days, often we find so many people, they have a insatiable hunger of speaking, and there are so many people who are speaking in so many different forums, and most of the times they are just reading from somewhere and then they are speaking. Some people are speaking even professionally, as a profession, as the uh, you know uh, to gain so many followers on social media and all these things. So how does one understand that what is the right source, or what is the most beneficial source of hearing, which will actually have that impact on the person who is hearing from on these subject matters?
Yes, that's a very important question. One has to hear from an authentic source. Um, if one wants to study medical knowledge, for example, one has to study from qualified doctors, not from a quack, one who has attained the requisite qualifications. So that goes for any subject, including the subject of spiritual science. So, what is the criterion? What is the qualification by which we can understand whether this is the right person to hear from? First and foremost, that person must be connected to a disciplic succession that is bona fide. A disciplic succession is a succession of teachers and students, Guru Shishya Parampara. And this Parampara should come all the way from Lord Krishna himself, from God, in a long series of gurus and disciples. So, when one is connected to such an authorized disciplic succession, and one is speaking faithfully on the basis of what one has heard in that disciplic succession, and one is repeating that without any changes, without any modifications, without speculations, without all sorts of interpretations, then one can be understood to be a bona fide representative or a speaker of this field. So one must check the credentials, just like when one goes to a doctor, one first looks at his degree. What is the degree that this person has, and where has he learned from, etc. So in the same way, one checks the credentials of a spiritual speaker by seeing first and foremost where that person has acquired his or her knowledge from. Of course, there are many other factors as well, but this would be one of the most important. And having heard, then he must try to apply these principles in his life. Then we can understand that this is a proper candidate to receive spiritual knowledge from.
Oh, Maharaj, if you may allow, I may ask another question connected to your answer.
Yes, please.
So, Maharaj, now you gave a nice and practical example about doctors and their prescription and they have learned in these in recent uh, this pandemic. There has been a spate or some kind of disagreement between medical professionals, Ayurveda, and it seems that there was allegation that uh, these doctors or this doctor community, they are trying to monopolize health. Taking cue from that, someone may say that is is this also a monopolization that God or the supreme absolute truth is approachable by everyone? So if you are saying that, oh, are you coming from this parampara, that parampara? So you are trying to monopolize things, but God should be accessible to everyone and anyone. So why would this be necessary, the parampara? Is it that uh, it's individual's journey? Like here we are in Rishikesh, so we hear many times these people, why should I choose a particular path because that restricts my growth? Because then I have to just accept certain things in a certain way and not accept other things. So, would that kind of objection would be like a blemish on this process of or this requirement of following a parampara, or is there a another way that you can still be accessing that knowledge source without restricting yourself to just one way, one practice, one process or tradition or lifestyle or whatever that parampara means? I hope you know what I'm trying to
Yes,
say. Coming.
yes, you have framed your question very nicely as well. God is certainly accessible to everyone. It is indeed everyone's right to approach God. It is also the duty to approach God. However, going anywhere cannot be done whimsically. If one wants to go from Bombay to Delhi, then there is a certain way to go. There are so many routes, but those routes must be bona fide. And we must authenticate those routes with our navigation, whether we are going in the right direction or not. There must be some standard map, some frame of reference by which we can judge whether we are moving in the right direction or not. If we just say, well, why do I need any other process of checking, of understanding which way to go? I can figure out for myself as to where Delhi is with respect to Bombay. That may work, it may not work. Because even if you look at a map, once you start moving on the road, you will need affirmations constantly. You will need to be guided by somebody about whether you're moving in the correct direction or not. So, similarly, definitely, just like anybody has the freedom to go from one place to another place, we all have the freedom to move towards God, but we must know the milestones. We must know the map. We must know the locations. We must know what is what. We must understand the GPS. So it needs some guidance. So going anywhere and doing anything requires guidance. Even if we want to learn from on our own, we go to tutorials on the YouTube, or we pick up self-help books or do it yourself kits, and we sometimes go to classes. So we always need something. We need some books, we need some people, we need some tools to help us understand. So we cannot devise at our whims ways and means of doing things. So medical help, you said, yes, definitely it is everybody's prerogative to maintain good health, but we cannot do it whimsically. There are some principles of health. Ayurveda or allopathy, that's another question. But whether it is this or that pathy, the important thing is that there are certain, criteria. There's a certain outlook, a certain vision on how to maintain health, what constitutes good health. So there is a science behind both these pathies. So therefore, one cannot just go about whimsically trying to be healthy. One may speculate, but one does not know for sure whether what conclusion one has arrived at is right or wrong. So to be sure, one must be guided by the proper person, by a bona fide person. So that is why the disciplic succession is important. It is not a question of monopolizing, but it is just a question because we don't say we are the only ones. There are surely other people who are also connected to various bona fide paramparas, and they are guiding people nicely. But such a bona fide connection, such a bona fide form of guidance or help is certainly necessary. That is the point. So I hope that has answered the question.
Yes, Maharaj, thank you so much for that. Now, we've stopped the hand raising button in the interest of Maharaj's time. However, we have Muskan, Jairam, and Sapan who have already got into the queue, and we'll ask them the question. So, the next question will be asked by Muskan.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Um, it is said that hearing and chanting is the topmost devotional service. But sometimes my mind speaks louder than my tongue, and I'm not able to hear my chanting. Sometimes I'm singing, sometimes I'm chanting fast, slow, but my mind is still louder than my tongue. So, how do I listen to my tongue and not my mind?
Okay, that is the, shall we say, the typical challenge that any devotee faces. Anyone who tries to control the restless mind has to go through this challenge. Everybody, every sadhaka means a practitioner. Every practitioner has to go through this. So actually, it is the nature of the mind to flit from topic to topic, and the restless mind does not allow us to focus or to concentrate on anything, any task at hand. It immediately pulls us away to some other place. So the only way to do that is by continually making proper, concentrated, and conscious efforts to hear attentively the sound of the holy names that we are chanting. So, by a very conscious, deliberate effort and in a prayerful mood, by praying to Lord Krishna to help us to chant, we will be able to overcome the obstinate power of the mind. Then we will see that our chanting will improve step by step. It is a process that requires cultivation and hard work, and it is work in process.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Maharaj.
We'll have the next question from Jairam.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So my question is that, like, how to develop vairagya? Like, if I'm taking up of any sadhana, or if I take up any practice, how to develop that indomitable will, because my mind gets erratic. Like if I'm focusing on my goal today, I will be super motivated, and tomorrow I'll feel low. And even it applies to some of my spiritual practice. So that developing the vairagya to control the vasanas, like how, like that erratic approach is getting persisted in my mind. So how to overcome it? So that's my question.
Well, there is a conscious effort to be made, definitely. So that is very important. That is called discrimination or vivek. We have to employ that. At the same time, uh, the fundamental process of bhakti uh, gives us that real renunciation. So, Vasudeva Bhagavati Jnana Vairagya. So, it talks about the process of bhakti giving us jnana as well as vairagya. Um, so, when we serve Lord Krishna with devotion, then all knowledge and all vairagya, renunciation automatically comes step by step. So even though we may, with some conscious effort, try to inculcate some renunciation, that is also a helpful practice. We must try to do that by using our spiritual intelligence. But ultimately, as we do our bhakti, like chanting the names of Lord Krishna, then automatically the vairagya comes. This is how Srila Prabhupada has explained it from the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Thank you, Maharaj. We'll have from Sapan. Looks like Sapan has some technical issues, so we'll stop the event here in the interest of time. Thank you, Maharaj, for taking out so much time and sharing your infinite wisdom with us. It has been really inspiring, and this is a most auspicious beginning to the ISKCON Chowpatty Club on Clubhouse. So thank you for that, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.